And from Capitol Hill to the streets of Havana, as these talks between the U.S. and Cuba continue, we have a unique look from inside the island. Gene Ramirez, the morning anchor of our Tampa affiliate, WFLA, made the trip to Cuba earlier this month ahead of the latest talks to see how this new chapter is playing out on the ground. Here's just one moment from that trip after Gene's taxi driver gets pulled over for no apparent reason.
We just got pulled over by police for no apparent reason. The driver, Align, didn't break any rules, so you got out of the car, we all stayed inside. What did he tell you?
Just routine, just to check my driver license point and things like that. Routine.
And that's common?
That's common. I thought that he was going to ask me to check my trunk too, but no, he didn't. So I just told him that we are friends and we're coming here, and that's it.
And joining me now, just back from Cuba, is Gene Ramirez. Gene, good to see you.
Good to see you, Jose. Great to be on. Thank you for your interest in our coverage over there in Havana.
Some great reporting, and a lot of the stuff we don't normally get to see. Talk to me about your experiences. For example, that cab ride, is that something that driver felt happens to him all the time? Is it unusual? What was your feeling on that?
Yeah, and you know, we set out to be objective observers over there, and I think we accomplished that. And that cab ride is actually a great example of the economy that the people of Cuba have to deal with. And it's really an example of the black market economy that's there. You know, that cab ride, us being pulled over is exactly what the driver tells us happens to Cuban people all the time. Buses full of Cuban people as the government looks for black market contraband. Now, we're not talking about drugs and that kind of thing. We're talking about things as simple as a leg of ham, a block of cheese that the Cuban people can't afford to buy on their average monthly salary that's equal to about US $20. So they've created this black market economy, and oftentimes Cuban police will stop cars and buses to try to bust these people, and there's big punishment that goes along with that.
And Gene, at one point in your reporting, you called Havana a tale of two cities. What do you mean by that?
You know, this ties back also to this economy. You know, I actually posted using the hashtag Gene in Cuba a lot of behind-the-scenes images from my trip there, from my coverage there. And this one is a jarring image that you see, the Bodeguita del Medio. That's a very famous stop for mojitos for tourists in Havana. On the other side, you see an older Cuban woman picking up her food rations over there. And it's such a different experience. You know, a mojito at the Bodeguita del Medio can cost the tourists, you know, 5, 6 Cuban convertible pesos, whereas, again, the average Cuban income is about $20. So imagine if you made $4,000 US, that mojito would cost you about $1,000 US. So, you know, as we look at all these changes between the U.S. and Cuba when it comes to domestic policy, also when it comes to foreign investment, which the Cuban government says they need our money, I think sometimes what's left out of that equation is how does this affect the Cuban people? Now, they will tell you that they are happy that tourists are going there because, of course, they're getting some cash tips and they're using that currency to buy at the Cuban government-run stores. But down the line, how does that affect people? Oftentimes, that's left out of the reporting on Cuba.
And Gene, finally, this was a really personal trip for you. Your family's roots are in Cuba. What was it like meeting relatives you had only heard about?
You know, you say that, and I get goosebumps again, because these are people who I'd only heard about, as you mentioned, who I'd seen in pictures. But beyond that, these are people who still live in the same house that my mother grew up in. My mother has not stepped foot in that house for more than 50 years. So I was able to step in there and see the living room that she played in as a child, the chandelier that was my grandmother's favorite chandelier, and reconnect with these people who have, you know, also kind of gave me a glimpse at how difficult it is for Cubans to leave the island. Now, recently, the Cuban government has made it easier for them to leave, but other governments are not being as accepting of these people. This cousin of my mother's, who I met in Cuba for the first time, told me she went to the U.S. interest section 6 times, and 6 times she's been denied. So it's not just my story, Jose. I think what's important to mention here is that this is a story of so many Cuban families that, without pointing fingers at anybody, the fact is they've been separated for so long.
Gene Ramirez, extraordinary reporting. Thank you for being with me this morning.
Thank you, Jose.